You are so lucky, boys and girls. All of these videos that I've been making lately are all after tennis practice, and I don't feel like putting a nice outfit on to be on the screen, so you don't have to look at my face, but you do have to listen to my voice. We will read the story in the beginning of chapter 14 about the Chesapeake Bay in class. And I have some diagrams to go over with you about the Chesapeake Bay because they always ask about it on the AP exam. For A students, it is a great prime example of giving something that's an example with which you are familiar. And of course, this picture is in your book, and it shows you the drainage basin of the Chesapeake Bay. This chapter is all about water pollution, as you can tell, and again, it's one of the hearts of the entire course. We need to understand how water pollution happens, what the big risks are, what the dangers are, how we clean it up, and you need to name those pollutants. Just another example of not being able to write the words water pollution anymore, but instead being able to name that pollutant. This first part here is about the Chesapeake Bay and the story, so we'll save that for tomorrow. So let's get right into water pollution and what it is. You know, water pollution is generally defined as something that contaminates a river, a lake, a stream, ocean even, and groundwater. Don't forget, when we talk about groundwater, we're talking about the aquifer. We can divide up all of our pollutants into two general categories. One is called point sources, and this picture here on the right is a great example of a point source of pollution. And the best way I can tell you to remember point sources is you can point to it. You can say, look at that nasty stuff that's coming out of that drain right there. That's a point source of pollution for this body of water. And this blue just isn't making it, is it? I'm going to have to switch to red. So this body of water is being polluted by a point source of pollution. Non-point sources are much more difficult to control and to monitor and to maintain. Well, that's because it isn't just happening at one place. If there's a company, let's say it's the St. Johns River, and this is the coffee factory. What is that, Maxwell House? And this is the Maxwell House pipe. Well, you can figure that out. You can see, oh my gosh, there's pollutants coming out of that pipe right there. Who's it belong to? Work backwards and figure out, oh, it belongs to Maxwell House. And so we can control point sources a lot easier than we can non-point sources. Non-point sources are generalized locations. So it comes from all over the place. It can be an entire neighborhood, let's say, or something like that. It's diverse. They're spread out. They're dispersed. They're all over the place. All of these cows are providing some sort of pollution that's going to end up running off into this body of water. That's non-point sources. There's no pipe you can point to and say, look at that mess that's happening there. Why is this important? Well, it's important because we can clean up point sources, and actually, at the end of this chapter, we're going to learn about several laws that have been passed in the United States to control and deal with point sources. We're not so good at controlling non-point sources. In fact, our own St. Johns River is pretty clean. It's pretty clean because there are plenty of pipes dumping stuff in the river, but we know about them. We know where they are. We know what companies run them or who monitors them. And so if something nasty is ending up in the river, we go to those people. They get fined. We make them clean it up. Non-point sources, nobody's to blame. And so it's much harder to control. So most of the pollution that we have in our rivers today are from what we call non-point sources. And we have the same concept when it comes to air pollution as well, which is in the next chapter. All right. Why do we care about pollution? there are several types, and we're going to go through many of them. In fact, in the book, it starts with human wastewater, which is the one we'll cover in this video. But then we also deal with heavy metals, other serious hazardous substances that get dumped into our bodies of water. We'll also talk about oil spills in particular, how we pollute our oceans. And then the last part is all about the laws. Remember something else before we get started with human wastewater. Go back a second. Something else to remember about water pollution is, even though we're concentrating on what happens in the body of water, remember that a lot of ecosystems, like a marsh, like a swamp, is a mixture of land and water. So many times we're talking about more than just the water itself, but we're also talking about land areas. You know, in this case, this land area could be equally as polluted. Maybe it's not from the cow manure, but it might be from something else. So we'll talk about water pollution and we'll focus on that, but keep in the back of your mind the fact that these ecosystems oftentimes blend together, and that the pollutants of a water supply can certainly be land ecosystems as well. All right, back to human wastewater. We have a problem. It's been a problem as long as humans have lived together, and that is keeping separate the wastewater, you know, where our feces go, and our drinking water. And in more modern times, we also have to worry about things like washing our clothes and polluting our drinking water supply with so-called gray water. It might be for bathing or it might be from washing clothes. But the point here is we have to separate in the human condition what we do with these three things as opposed to our drinking water supply. Now, the idea used to be simple enough back in ancient times. You made sure that you got your drinking water way upstream, and you made sure that you did all of this kind of stuff way downstream. The river flows this way, and so you didn't have to worry about what went into the water right here, because you got your drinking water way up here. You didn't worry about who lived downstream, and of course that's the problem. In our modern societies, people live all along these rivers, and these rivers cross numerous countries sometimes. And so the issue gets to be people here are polluting somebody else's water further downstream. Alright, so when we talk about sewage, we'll talk about human waste. There is one bacteria for us to zero in on, and it's called Escherichia coli. E. coli for short. The presence of E. coli in drinking water tells us that there's probably human waste there. Now, the E. coli in and of itself is not real damaging to us, doesn't cause a lot of diseases, but it tells us that human waste must be there. That's called an indicator species. 3 reasons why scientists worry about it, and the first is the oxygen that's in the water. Remember something that we've learned before, and that is that aquatic organisms get their oxygen not from the O in H2O, but they get their oxygen from O2 that is dissolved in the water, and that's called DO, or dissolved oxygen. So water that has a high dissolved oxygen content is very healthy and very good. The problem is organisms that cause us harm, organisms that are pathogenic, will feed off of organic material and use up a lot of oxygen. So when these organisms are present, and this includes E. coli too, when these organisms are present, the DO goes down. Not good. The other term you need to know is called something called biochemical oxygen demand. Sometimes it's called just biological oxygen demand, BOD. And these two measures are usually opposite of each other. When the BOD is up, the DO is down, and that's a bad sign. And the reason is because this biochemical oxygen demand is telling us that decomposers and organisms like that are fast at work. And if they're fast at work, that means there's a lot of dead stuff around. And these organisms are working overtime to decrease the oxygen, decrease the DO. In fact, things get so bad that we find areas in a body of water that are so-called dead zones. Nothing can live there. This gets back to the old idea of eutrophication. Just like a pond will become full of algae, the BOD will go way up towards the end of the eutrophication process because these oxygen-demanding organisms will be fast at work using up the DO to the point where there's no oxygen left, and all the organisms die. This picture here shows you a fish die-off in Florida with no oxygen in the water. And you can see these big pieces of algae here. With no oxygen in the water, the fish cannot survive. They try to swim away, but there's not enough oxygen for them to get away, and they die as a result. This map here shows you one of the worst areas of low DO and high BOD in our country, and it's the Mississippi Basin, because so many chemicals and so many things end up coming down the Mississippi River and flushing out into the Gulf of Mexico. There's a real area here of very, very low DO, and that's what we're seeing here. The orange and the yellow is very, very low oxygen concentration. It's not so bad further down over here off the coast of Texas. So this is an area of very, very light fishing, not a lot of organisms. These guys that do fishing in the Gulf of Mexico usually do their fishing over in this area here because they've recognized this area of very, very low DO. So oxygen is the first thing that they worry about. The second thing they care about is nutrients in the water, and of course that leads to eutrophication. We've covered that before, and that's your little quiz thing that I want you to do for this video. I want you to write down tonight the steps of eutrophication. We've covered them in another chapter. Do it from memory, and hand it to me as you walk in the door tomorrow. The steps of eutrophication. I'll give you a hint. It all starts with too many nutrients in the water. Then we'll go over what eutrophication is again tomorrow in class if you don't have a clue. If you don't have a clue, write something down anyway. Go back in your notes and look it up. But I know I've told you, you got to know the steps of eutrophication. The third thing we worry about is pathogenic organism. Everybody remember what pathogenic means? Pathos means danger or death, and genic is genesis or the starting of. So pathogenic organisms are organisms that cause us harm, organisms that are disease-causing. Here are the names of the common diseases from human wastewater. You need to be familiar with them. It would be nice if you could name them. That would be real good, because if you're writing an essay, you might have to name the number one. Most important common disease from human wastewater is cholera. Typhoid fever from the organism that's called Salmonella typhi. Stomach flu, of course, that's a virus. Chronic diarrhea is a major issue. Chronic diarrhea is something we all worry about. What happens to a human with chronic diarrhea? What is the underlying medical condition that makes diarrhea a health threat? I mean, people die from diarrhea. The answer, of course, is dehydration. because you're losing fluids out of the end that you're not supposed to lose fluids in. And if you don't replace those fluids, you can become severely dehydrated. And if you don't deal with that situation, people die from it. And hepatitis, of course, is the virus that attacks your liver. All right, so here are some pictures, the names of organisms. Here is the actual spelling of Escherichia coli, E. coli. It's also called coliform bacteria. You need to be able to recognize both terms, E. coli and coliform bacteria. We're talking about the same thing. We're talking about the organism that's normally in our stool. If we were to culture your feces, you would have E. coli in it. And that's normal and that's fine. But when we find it in our water, we know that somehow human wastewater got mixed in with the regular water. And this is what Salmonella typhi looks like. Do you remember from biology class what these things are called? These whip-like extensions? That's right, they're called flagella. And Salmonella typhi is a highly mobile bacteria. It is a rod-shaped organism. It's a bacillus. And it is got many, many flagella on it. So it swims around. It moves because of all of those flagella. There are other waterborne diseases. Now, these are different groups of organisms. The protozoans, you might remember, it's the second kingdom. The first kingdom is the bacteria. And the second kingdom is the protozoans. They belong to kingdom Protista. Kingdom Protista has plant-like organisms. And then it also has animal-like organisms. And the protozoans are the animal-like protists. And they're a parasite. They will live in you and they will do you harm. The two most common are or the disease is called amoebic dysentery. And all of these things cause the same problems in humans, diarrhea. From a doctor's point of view, the fact that you've got really, really bad diarrhea means something's causing it to happen, and she's got to figure out what the disease is. What is causing that diarrhea? Is it an amoeba? Or is it something like this organism here, G. lamblia? Giardiasis is just an infection with G. lamblia. And I put this in here mainly because this is the problem that we had in Eagle Harbor about 10, 12 years ago, where during construction phases, the drinking water pipe got misconnected to the sewage line pipe, and so the wrong water was coming out of people's faucets, and they were finding this organism causing diarrhea in a lot of the people in Eagle Harbor. As a result of that, people were going to the doctor, and that's how they discovered that there was a misconnection in the piping. And there are the parasitic worms. The parasitic worms, like schistosoma, of course, causes the disease called schistosomiasis. That is also a parasite that gets found in people's stool. This is the parasite, Schistosoma mansoni. Why do I put this in here? Because I used to teach this stuff at George Washington University, so I'm very familiar with all the different diseases that we find in drinking water. This is the egg form. Sometimes you find this in the person's stool, and you identify it based on this characteristic protrusion here. When it comes to the organism itself, it's rare to actually find the organism, but you can, and you can see here, similar to the tapeworm picture I showed you before, it's got like a sucker on it, and this is how the organism connects to your intestine and is your friend, your parasite. And here are some more pictures. This is what Giardia looks like. It's a one-celled organism, but you can also see that Giardia is mobile. It's got a lot of flagella. It's got this characteristic look to it. Looks like it's almost got eyes. It doesn't. It's a one-celled organism. And this is what E. coli looks like when you grow it on an agar dish. I think I mentioned to you before, one of the things that we used to do on board ship is 3 times a day in 4 different locations of the ship, every day we go around and sample drinking water at a water fountain or at a faucet somewhere. And then we take that water, we put it on a petri dish like this, and nothing should grow. If 24 hours later we come back and we see a agar plate that looks like this, we have a big problem on our hands. This is called a colony. So there's millions of bacteria in this colony. And it took 24 hours for this to grow this way. And here's a micrograph of what E. coli looks like. It too is a bacillus. It's a rod-shaped bacteria with lots of flagellum. Amoeba you're used to seeing, you remember this from biology class. It's got those characteristic pseudopods, pseudopodia, which help it to move across surfaces. It kind of just oozes its way out, and then the rest of the organism will catch up, and then it will ooze out some more. Its pseudopod means fake foot, so this is the way the amoeba gets around. Alright, I think that's everything I wanted to cover in the disease-causing organisms, oxygen demand, and I went real shortly with eutrophication because I expected you to know that by now. The next video is going to be all about how we clean up this water. In a modern society, we use different techniques like a septic tank, or the water goes to a sewage treatment plant. You need to know all the steps in those as well. I'm going to sign off now. Hope you enjoyed this short little video about water pollution in general. We'll learn about how to clean it up, and then we'll learn about further water pollutants in coming videos.